I'm deeply concerned about the quality of the bureaucrats we have in the Western world, in the US and especially in Europe. The quality of our leadership is a disaster. I mean, if you compare to the great presidents the US had in the 19th century, then we really have had in the last 20 years a series of completely incompetent characters. Common sense is an important feature for someone who has competence and the talent for organizing and for implementing policies that make sense instead of policies that are based on some kind of ludicrous ideology. So we have an example in the case of Germany, which was in the 50s and 60s, the so-called Wirtschaftswunder, the miracle, economic miracle. And the country did very well until the late 1980s, 1990s. We had, in my opinion, in Germany, in the form of Karl Otto Böll, who was the chairman of the Bundesbank, the CEO of the Bundesbank, we had a brilliant, intelligent central banker with common sense. And now we have in Europe all these money printers. And the worst part is these interventionists that central bankers have become. And when you hear their speeches, they want to do this, they want to do that. And it's all nebulous because they are data dependent themselves. And it would appear to me, sadly, that the current Fed chair is also motivated by politics. In other words, his desire is to have the Democrats, specifically Biden, re-elected, and at all costs to avoid having a Trump winning the elections. You understand? It seems to me that the government, the Treasury Department under Janet Yellen, who is not exactly a qualified person to run anything in government, and the Fed is all the same. And the deficits in the US, as you should know, are enormous, over 6% of GDP in what the administration calls an economic expansion. I'm not so sure the economy is expanding, but that's what the administration says. And we have these deficits. You take the deficit away, there's no economic growth. And the deficit, these idiots, for years and years, they told us that through the modern monetary theory, MMT, that deficits wouldn't matter. And now they have it in front of their eyes that it matters because the interest payments on the debts are going ballistic up strongly. The guiding principle is not to trust any politician or any central bankers. They're all liars. They mislead the public throughout the period that they've been in office. And my sense is the only way to really protect yourself is by owning precious metals. I'm not saying it's the best investment, but it's kind of a safe way to protect yourself from, and I have to emphasize this, the evilness of central bankers, because the central bankers are basically bankrupting the middle class and the lower classes, and of benefit to pigs like myself that have assets. You understand? We have precise statistics how much of the wealth in America is owned by the richest people and how much is owned by the 50 poorest people. I mean, there shouldn't be any poor people in America. It should be reasonably well distributed. But it's happened because of monetary policies, because the asset holders benefit from asset inflation, including me. I'm saying this as an economist and a social observer, not as someone who is an investor. But as an investor, I don't care how much they print, because something goes up and something goes down. And it is our duty as fund managers and investors to find the sectors that will go up and the sectors that will go down. I mean, it's a good idea to hold some gold in your garden somewhere, but don't tell your relatives about it because you may get killed relatively soon or poisoned or whatever. And The other point I want to make is, you understand, your question would have been easy to answer in the 1950s. My grandparents always told me, Mark, you have to work and 10% of your salary you put aside and you save and you put it in a cantonal bank. These are kind of state institutions in Switzerland. They're owned largely by the cantons, by the states, and is very safe. But this has changed. You understand, money in the bank in an inflationary environment never pays the sufficient interest. It's always sort of below the true cost of living increases. Now, the problem with gold, there are many problems. I don't want to go into all the problems, but one of them is obviously, where do you keep your gold? Because if the governments had the great wisdom, because they're all dictatorial, although they pretend to be elected by the voters, they behaved like the worst dictators and locked people up and went to the population and said, if you work for the government or so and so, you have to be. You understand? They can force the most evil measures on the people because people don't resist anymore. This is the problem of the current environment in the world, is that the people who can think don't resist sufficiently, and they don't go and vote sufficiently to vote the socialist and green communists out of government. People sometimes ask me, well, how can you live in a country which is run by the army or a king and so forth? I want to say that I'm Swiss, and in Switzerland I feel that I have far less freedom than when I'm in Thailand. As long as you don't viciously attack the government and you don't make any nasty remarks about the king, your individual freedom in Thailand is very high, very high. I can go anywhere and buy a can of beer or a bottle of beer. I don't need to have a shop with a license to sell me beer or something like this. You understand? That is freedom. In America, when I go to a hotel and I want to go buy a beer outside the hotel because the hotel bars are mini bars are so expensive, or if I want to go and buy a bottle of whiskey, I have to travel for ages to find a liquor store. This is what destroys the economy. Regulation by the government. And I mean, I don't have a very high opinion of Trump. Actually, I have a rather low opinion of him, academically speaking and intelligent-wise. But by doing nothing for 4 years and eliminating a lot of deadwood regulations, the economy under him and the mood under him was much better than it is at the present time under Mr. Biden. We need to know who is counting the votes. As Stalin, who was a very intelligent man, correctly observed, it doesn't matter who votes, what matters is who counts the votes. I was a very good friend with Stan Salvixen, and he was called Ehrenstein, and Charlie Minter. They were the three leading strategists at Merrill Lynch in the 80s. And already in 85, 86, they started to talk about the excessive debt growth. And if one thing has surprised me in the world, that I have to admit openly, when I studied, and also earlier in my career, when I started to work in 1970 on Wall Street, and interest rates were in 1970 at 6% on the 10 years Treasury, and then they went to over 15% in 81. I never would have anticipated to see in my life negative interest rates. I had read at university the works of Silvio Gesell, who at the beginning of the 20th century had written books about how to drive consumption. In other words, you introduce negative interest rates in the banks so people will not save money and then they go and spend it. This was kind of an economic sophism because the economy needs savings in order to carry out the capital investments. But anyway, never thought I would see it because interest rates at the end of the 1970s were at 14-15% interest, and the interest rates on deposits was 22% bank deposits. So nobody expected interest rates to go up as much as they did, and then nobody expected them to go as low as they did eventually in 2010, 2020. But the one thing that I want to say about your your questions about investments, knowing that we all know that, I think people have to analyze everything more in nominal terms, but then adjust it for inflation. Now, you and I, we could have a discussion for 3 hours about what is inflation. I'd like to say inflation is principally a monetary increase in the system. In other words, the quantity of money goes up. And the level of interest rates will never tell you whether money is tight or not tight. That I want to stress. Because in Turkey, we have 100% interest rates and we have inflation at around 100%. And you go into Istanbul and life goes on like normal. So even at 100%, you can have easy monetary policies, which happens during high inflationary period. The criteria is tight. In a tight monetary environment, the currency strengthens strongly and there is very little speculation. In other words, I'll give you an example. The Russell 2000 made in October, November a new low, and within 48 days it made a new high. Never happened before. This is the kind of things that happen when money is, there's plenty of liquidity in the system that many people overlook. That's why I'm telling you, I would not be a heavy short seller of stocks. I might be a short seller of the dollar, but even that I wouldn't do because I don't know what the central bankers will agree with each other because they coordinate their policies. I know that nobody will vote for my view, but my view is in the Western world, the governments need to cut government expenditures by 50%, 50. They have to cut Social Security. They have to cut defense spending. All these American bases all over the world are useless in my opinion. And the other thing I want to say, we had price increases over the last 3 years. Now we may debate for a family with children and a family without children, a family that owns their home outright and a family that pays mortgages, variable mortgages, or rents property. Everybody has a different rate of inflation. My rate of inflation in the last 3 years was relatively low because the price of beer has stayed steady, didn't go up. The point is simply, let's say over the last 2-3 years, the cost of living for most households has gone up between 15 and 25 and maybe 30%. Now, this year, 2024, the rate of price increases is only, say, 1 or 2% because the rate of inflation is coming down. Let's assume it's 1%. Then the central banks will say, oh, you see, we brought down inflation, and they will then do, what will they do? They'll print again money, quantitative easing number. In 2009, when they started, I said, it's going to be infinity. They will never stop printing money. Difficult things in your life is to stop smoking, stop taking drugs, and to stop printing money for central banks. Because the system is adjusted to it. There's only one option for the US government: default or print money. And in all societies, whether the Babylonians or the Romans or Greeks, they have eventually printed money because that's the easiest to do. This is the least painful. In a money printing environment, it's very dangerous to short stocks because I think that the Magnificent Seven are grossly overvalued and so forth. But I would have said the same in 2000 and between Christmas 1999 and March 2000, the Nasdaq went up another 30%. I covered my shorts in 99, but I had huge losses. I rather go into cash. But what I wanted to say before, you see, in the 50s, you could put your money in a bank and say it's safe. That you cannot do anymore nowadays. Money on deposit in a bank is not safe. That should be clear to anyone. Otherwise, today, I could get 5% interest on my deposits or even more than 5%. But I am reluctant to put all my money on deposit at 5%. It's enough for my lifestyle. Although I still work and I earn my money from my business, not from my investments. The investments is a side, but I don't think that the investments have gone up much more than the cost of living increases. And especially, say, I look at home prices. Home prices have gone up much more than, say, cash deposits. And the Fed, Yellen was the president of the San Francisco Fed when the bubble burst in 2007. The San Francisco Fed is responsible for California, Nevada, Arizona, the three greatest bubbles in America in housing in 2007 were in these districts, and Yellen couldn't see it. It's hard to believe that in politics nowadays, incompetence gets rewarded. They're shot upwards. Also in Europe, you look at Ursula von der Leyen, she's the head of the EU, or at Lagarde. All incompetent people, but the more incompetent you are, the higher you go in politics.
I don't feel like you would get too far in politics.
Look, I'm in the committee of an initiative in Switzerland for neutrality. The best Switzerland can do is to stay neutral. It's good for the world. They can have all kinds of negotiations between evil people and less evil people. Good people don't exist in politics, but less evil maybe. But anyway, I had, as a result of that, a little to do with politicians. Never in my life would I like to go into politics, besides the fact that I'm too old. I mean, I don't want to waste my time with these idiots. And the same I can say, never in my life would I go and work in a university. Never.